Hi, I'll continue reading this book called The Whipping Boy by Sid Fleischman, and we're on chapter 13, which is called The Chase. Remember, Jemmy and the prince need to get away from the kidnappers. A thoroughbred of the streets, Jemmy acted on instinct. He didn't wait to be nabbed. Remember, Prince Brat had just said, "Oh, he's right there under the straw," when he was trying to hide. In a burst of straw, he shot up and made a leap for the door. Cutwater, startled, lost the merest breath of time, but it was enough. Jemmy flung open the door and ran, his long arms outstretched. Cutwater lurched after him, and Prince Brat followed. Jemmy vanished into the wild green tangle. He jumped a great fallen log, ducked under low-hanging branches, and like a rabbit made sudden changes in direction. We could hear Cutwater close behind, breathing like a bellows. "I'm on your track. Stop before I aggravex with you, Prince." Juvie covered the ground at full tilt. Leaves crackled under his feet. Gaw, he thought, he might as well be leading a parade for all the noise he was making. He reached a small clearing and half jumped out of his skin. Sniffling near the skeleton white roots of an upturned hollow tree stood a wild beast, a bear. Jemmy would have preferred Cutwater's own company, but before he could find his legs, the hairy beast took flight. It went crashing away to Jemmy's left. Jemmy got his breath back. Then, almost without thinking, he dove into the hollow of the dead tree and snugged himself inside. Moments later, he caught the merest glimpse of Cutwater, cupping an ear. Turning on his heels, the rat-a-bone man gave a shout. "Practically got you by the hind leg, pesky prince." Jemmy let out a small sigh of relief. Cutwater would have been mighty surprised if he caught that bear by the hind leg. As the sound of the chase grew fainter, Jemmy crawled out of the hollow root. The sun was now high enough to send down smoky rays of light through the treetops. Which way was the river? Then he saw Prince Brat, his face lobster red from running, at the edge of the clearing. "Unfaithful servant," he protested, glaring hard at Jemmy. Until this moment, Jemmy hadn't had a moment's pause for anger, but now fury shot in his eyes. "Curse this blabber-tongued, hateful prince! You betrayed me. You would have deserted me without a care." Jemmy bristled. "Ain't it me they think as prince? If you hadn't pointed me out under the straw, Cutwater would have flown off to pick up my tracks, and we could have crept away dead easy, and we wouldn't be running our lungs out." The prince pondered this for a moment. He nodded. "Then I forgive you." Jemmy was speechless for a moment. "Forgive me? Don't trouble yourself, my good and loyal prince. You get yourself another whipping boy." I have not dismissed you yet," said the prince calmly. "I dismiss myself," said Jemmy. "I'll get where I'm going, and you can find your own way back to the castle." "I'll go with you." "Not likely." Jemmy turned to the right and beat his way back into the foliage. Chapter 14, in which is heard a voice in the forest. Jemmy could hear Prince Brat following in his tracks step by step. He grimly pressed on. Brambles, reaching out like cat's claws, tore at their fine garments. The forest trees rose all around like prison bars. Finally, Jemmy spun around. "Lay off. Go your own way." "This way suits me," said the prince. "Well, don't follow me. I've no more idea than a gnat where I'm heading." "Silence," whispered the prince, with a turn. "Hear that?" They froze, the two of them. A voice came wailing through the woods. "Petunia, Petunia." And then a young woman appeared, barefoot and jangling with bracelets. She moved through the trees as quickly as a wood spirit. "Petunia." She carried a coiled rope in one hand and held it outstretched with an amber chunk of comb honey. "Come here, darling. Come to Betsy." Suddenly, as if sensing a presence in the trees, she headed toward Jemmy and the prince. "Petunia, you naughty little rascal. Smell the honey? Come feast yourself, pet." Jemmy didn't know what to make of this woman, girl really, for as she drew closer he reckoned she couldn't be more than 14 or 15. He stepped into full view with the prince clinging to him like a shadow. "Miss?" She stopped short. "My eyes, who are you?" "Lost," said Jimmy. "Would you know which way to the river?" "Course I do. Ain't we heading for the fair, me and Petunia? Have you seen him?" "Petunia?" "Got Lucy did. My dancing bear. World famous." "Scared me out of my skin," Jimmy replied, and pointed back there. She turned on her heels and started off. "Hey," Jimmy shouted, "where's the river?" "Where it's always been, due south." "Which way is south?" Betsy pointed to set her arm like a signpost. "Straight on." "You're certain?" "Certain, I'm certain. Didn't Pa always say I had a head like a compass? Rest in peace." And she was gone. Their clothes were ripped to tatters by late morning when Jimmy and the prince caught sight of the river, and almost at once they dove back into cover. Mounted on high-stepping horses, a pair of soldiers were advancing along the river road. "They must be out searching for you," Jimmy whispered. "If they catch me with you, I'm done for." Prince Brat didn't seem to be listening. His eyes were fixed on the passing soldiers. "Look here," Jimmy muttered impatiently. "I can't have you sticking to me like a barnacle. Ain't you had a snout full of running away? Go back with the soldiers." The prince shook his head. "Let them pass." And then he added with the faintest of smiles, "This is the first time no one has had fits because I got my clothes grimy, and ladies keep me clean and starched as a pillowcase. Is my face as dirty as yours?" "But you're a prince. You don't belong knocking outside of the walls." Prince Brat gazed off in the distance. "Did you have lots of friends when you lived on the streets?" "Heaps." "Heaps, of course." "And hardly a one of 'em would fight me over a bone. Go back. Your pa must be having double fits of worry." The prince answered with a flash of resentment. "I might as well be stuffed and hung on the wall like a stag's head, for all he notices me." "You remind him often enough with all your pranks. How long are you going to let him sweat and stew?" "I don't know," said the prince. "Maybe I'll never go back. This is the best time I ever had." "Gaw," said Jimmy. Chapter 15 of the Hot Potato Man and Other Matters. The soldiers had passed by. Following the river, Jimmy ventured toward the city. Prince Brat strode along beside him. "As soon as I can, I aim to give you the slip," Jimmy warned. "You'll be on your own." The prince said nothing. The tide was low when they traveled out of sight on the road below a grassy embankment. In the distance, against billowing white clouds, stood a jackstraw jumble of ship's masts. "You can fend for your own self, can't you?" Jimmy asked suddenly. "Of course I can," said the prince in a stinging voice. "I don't need flocks of servants to fetch and carry for me." "It's settled, then." "Settled? Skip off any time you like." With the tide out, a wide mud flat lay exposed. From long habit, Jimmy kept his eyes peeled for treasure. Sandpipers scattered like mice before him. He spotted a barrel stave and pounced on it. "Trash," said the prince. "What are you doing?" "Mudlarking." "What?" "I've got to eat, don't I? If I can collect enough driftwood, I can sell it as firewood." The prince shrugged and walked on ahead. Jimmy gazed after him for a moment. What did the prince know about living on the streets? His meals were always appeared on china plates and silver trays, as if by magic. Let to himself, he would starve. "Not my worry," Jimmy muttered. "What?" "You, that's what. If you get hungry enough, you'll scramble back to the castle." The prince glared back at Jimmy and then stooped down to receive the broken leg of a chair. "Is this worth anything?" Jimmy nodded. Before long, the two of them had collected 3 more barrel staves in the back of the chair. Jimmy found something even more valuable, a bent and battered bird cage. He could go into business with that. Straightened out, it would hold rats. They rounded a bend, and the crack of a whip sounded in the air like a firecracker. Jimmy crawled up the embankment for a look. A weary old coach was mired in a mud hole on the road. The coachman, looking just as old and rickety, held his reins of his horse team and cracked his whip in the air. "Pull, gents, good lads, be me own fault not leading you around the bog. Me eyesight ain't what it was, is it, old tars?" Jimmy watched for another moment as the horse tried to pull the coach free. The coach was enameled blue with the lettering painted on the door panel, Captain Harry Nips, Hot Potato Man. Jimmy crawled over the embankment. A ride to the city would suit him fine. "Sir, would you take on a passenger? Here, let me set these barrel staves under the wheels." "Don't mind if you do," said Captain Nips. "I'm late for the fair as it is." Jimmy busied himself laying a firm track for the wheels. Prince Brat watched from the edge of the embankment. "You must be carrying a heavy load," Jimmy cried out. "Try again, Captain." The old man cracked his whip in the horse's strain, and the coach rolled up out of the bog. "Hop in, lad." Jimmy opened the door and saw that the coach was heavily loaded with raw potatoes and a huge iron kettle. Jimmy settled himself as best he could, and the coach lurched forward. At last Jimmy thought, "You're free of that prince," but he couldn't resist a backward glance. Prince Brass was standing in the center of the road. He dropped his load of driftwood and merely gazed at the receding coach. Jimmy straightened and folded his arms. The prince wasn't his lookout any longer, but he'd stood there like a wounded bird. Blast him! A prince hadn't a cockeyed notion how to fend for himself. "Stop, Captain. We left me friend behind." The hot potato man pulled up on the reins, and Jimmy leaned out the window. With an arm he motioned Prince Brat to come along. For an instant Jimmy thought he saw a smile flash across the prince's face, but it had vanished by the time the heir to the throne joined him inside the coach. They rode in silence. Jimmy wondered what had possessed him to refer to Prince Brat as his friend. Friend? Cows would give beer first. Then minutes later the coach rocked to a sudden halt. "Stand and deliver," said a shout. A pair of highwaymen with training pistols on Captain Nibbs. Jimmy hardly had to peer out. The voice was familiar. It was Hold Your Nose, Billy, and Cutwater. Oh no. Now what? We'll find out next time in the next chapter called Wherein the Prince Neither Bawls Nor Bellows.